um, making all this work for us. And we're really happy to have you come and finish off this series and tell us about the adventures you've taken on the Cohos Trail. So go ahead, Amy. Everyone
Yeah.
on mute. Yeah.
Well, so I guess I put together a little overview of a few things. I'm going to tell you about this amazing trail in northern New Hampshire that I hiked actually 2 different times, and I'll explain that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it's like to be alone for a long stretch of time in the wilderness. And as a preface to all of that, I'm going to just give you a very brief history of why I would be compelled to do this. And I think it goes back to my childhood. I spent a lot of time on the loose, roaming in the woods. In particular, a good friend of mine, a neighbor named Ben, he and I started just going off trail and finding landmarks and exploring. And our parents were either unaware or unconcerned where we were. We always knew where we were. And so I did that on and off, and I just always loved hiking and exploring. And then when I went to high school, I joined the outing club and had all kinds of opportunities to hike in the White Mountains. And that was my circle of friends. And so we were always going off on hikes. When I went to college, I went for a year and then I took a year off and I was a little bit at loose ends. And I remembered that Ben and his 3 older brothers had gone on a national outdoor leadership program out west, and I had never been out west. So I saved up my money and bought a train ticket and paid for a month in Wyoming in the Wind River Mountains. And it was completely life-changing for me to do that with a group and learned so much. Then later on, I joined, when I moved to Tamworth and in my adult years, I joined a group led by Heidi Engman called the Ladies Range Hikers. And with those wonderful women, I hiked to the huts in the Whites. We backpacked in New Hampshire and Maine. And it was always with friends. And I did my 4,000 footers, and I was almost always hiking with somebody, but I started hiking alone. And so one day, and now I'm going to share, whoops, I'm going to share the screen, except I didn't do that quite right. Hang on. Okay. So I was hiking. That's not what I want to share. Sorry. Okay. I was hiking with my Ladies Range hike friends, and we were spending a glorious day on the top of Mount Eisenhower, which is pictured here. And we're enjoying our lunch. And this guy comes hiking along, and we started chatting with him. And I said, "Where did you come from?" And he said, "I came from Canada." So I was immediately interested in this. And I kept talking to him, found out he was hiking something called the Cohos Trail. And I just couldn't get this idea out of my head that you could hike from the White Mountains up to Canada. So I ordered the map and the guidebooks from the Cohos Trail website, and I started forming a plan to take off and go hike this trail. And I thought that I really wanted to do it alone. I had never actually camped out alone. I had hiked alone, but I had never done a backpacking trip by myself, and it seemed like an interesting adventure. And so I set aside 14 days in the summer of 2018, 165 miles from the beginning of the trail, which starts at Crawford Notch, and all the way up to the tip of New Hampshire. And here's a map. So you can see the beginning of the trail down here. There's Bartlett, and it starts on the Davis Path, and it goes through the White Mountain National Forest. And it basically is a network of trails that's been pieced together into one long trail. And it ends way up here at the tiny little 4th Connecticut Lake, which is actually between the US and the Canadian border stations. You have to hike north of the border and get permission. And so this trail, it links together White Mountain National Forest, some rail trails, snowmobile and ATV trails. Sometimes you're hiking on some roads, and many miles of trails have actually been created to link these different trails that were existing together. And those trails are maintained and were created by the all-volunteer Cohos Trail Association. And they have people who actually adopt sections of trail and keep them more or less in shape. What I would say is that over the course of this 165 miles, some portions are very well maintained and very well marked, and other sections are not so much. So they have places along the trail where it's very organized and you can sign a registry book. They've been in existence for just over 20 years, and the trail is constantly changing. It's constantly being moved because of changes in land ownership. And also, they're always trying to get hikers off the roadways. Their goal is to have the trail entirely off of ATV trails and roads at some point, and they're working on that. They've gotten a lot of grant money, and they've done some beautiful kiosks that you find at different points along the trail, different sections. And it's just an amazing chance to explore New Hampshire north of the White Mountains. A lot of people stop at the White Mountains. That's the amazing mountainous section that everybody loves to hike, but there is really some absolute beauty and wonder north of the Whites. A lot of hikers who do this trail will, if they tackle it in the entirety, they'll do it either northbound or southbound. And there are two camps that get discussed on the Facebook group, which is better. Some people love to start up in the more road walking section up north and gradually make it to the White Mountains. And as I said earlier, the idea of hiking to Canada was just what really got me. So that's what I did. The group has some well-written guidebooks and maps. You can see this, it's a multi-sided map, and each section follows the trail and has locations of cabins, shelters, and possible camping sites. There's a wonderfully written guidebook, which is very descriptive. And then there are these things called the date book, which gives you the blow-by-blow in brief and is more of what you would carry along in your backpack. So when I was planning this hike, I really drew on my background of hiking with a lot of people more experienced than I was. And I always tried to pick up tidbits from the ladies' range hikers and other friends who did hiking. I was always kind of stuffing that information away and feeling like I was more and more prepared. And finally, when I got myself organized and decided to do this as a solo hike, it just presented a real extra challenge to do something I had never done. But since I couldn't get it out of my head, I really needed to do this hike. I did try to be aware of being safe. I tried out a couple of gadgets. Well, first, let me say that whenever I hike, I understand that you are taking risk and you need to be responsible for yourself. But I also felt like in this situation where I was gone for 2 weeks, most of it by myself, it was the responsible thing for people to know more or less where I was. So this is a satellite tracking device called a Spot, and it's carried on your backpack, and whenever it can see the sky, it's pinging to a satellite. So it does several things. It tracks you along your route, and in the evening, every night I would push a little button and I would send a pre-typed message that says everything is fine. I've made it to my destination, and that would go by email or text to family and friends. And they could also see where I had ended up on the map. So they had the map at home. They knew where I was supposed to be, and this would have enabled rescuers to find me if they needed to. So I had a first aid kit. I actually never opened it in 2 weeks, but I did sit down with my friend Ingrid, who was an emergency room nurse, and I went through what I might need to have, and we talked about emergency care. I took 2 water filters. What I have learned over the years is you can usually eat food that's not cooked. So if your stove goes out, you're not going to be in terrible trouble. But if your water filter goes out, that's kind of the end of it, because the water sources along the way, some of them, you look at them and you can't imagine you could ever drink from that. But in fact, filtering it works, and I had no trouble with that. So before I went on my hike, I'm not a big Facebook person, but I did decide to join the Friends of the Cohos Trail Facebook group. And I was really delighted that I did that, because 2 days before I was getting ready to set out on my hike, a fellow posted an urgent message that the section of the trail which goes through a part of, it's called the Kilkenny, between Jefferson and Stark, had experienced a major blowdown. So this is from a hike that I did in 2018, this picture when I went back to hike the Kilkenny, because I was not able to hike that section. It was absolutely impassable. Sorry, I went back in 2020. In 2018, it was impassable. They ended up having to get a Forest Service hotshot clearing crew in there and even make sense of the trail. It would have been a big mistake. So thankfully that fellow posted something, and I was able to get a ride from Jefferson and up and around to Stark from my #1 trail angel, Thad, who was happy to come and meet me. I rearranged things a little bit, backtracking some in that extra day, and then turning around and hiking north again, because I wanted to stay on track as I went further north. So the trail, the reality of being alone in the wilderness up in northern New Hampshire, once you leave the trails that are more known, you get into stuff like this, where it's just sort of a suggestion through the ferns. And you don't always have markings to go on. And it's really profound to be alone for that long of a time in a place like this. Just to give you the sense of how many people are on this trail, I was hiking northbound for 2 weeks, and I saw 2 southbound hikers, 2. I saw a few day hikers when I was around Mount Cabot, and a few other spots that are a little bit popular. But this was interesting, because back in 2018, I thought, well, maybe the trail just isn't that well known. And then when I went back to hike the Kilkenny section for 4 days this past summer with COVID, I thought, well, everybody's going to be going to the woods and I will see more people. I didn't. There was no one along the whole Kilkenny section between Jefferson and Stark. So when people say they hiked the Appalachian Trail solo, my understanding, although I've never done that trail, is that you're always meeting people and there's a community of hikers, and you may be alone, but you're with other people. When I've hiked sections of the AT, it's pretty busy. When you're hiking the Cohos Trail solo, it's really solo. I went on my earlier hike, I went 2 days without seeing a single person. I kept a journal, and I wrote, because I didn't have a lot to do after I get to camp, set up camp, cook dinner, and get ready to go to bed. So I did a lot of writing. And what I found was that my mind alone, with nobody around or very little to keep it entertained aside from hiking, that was my biggest challenge. So I'm going to read you a couple of excerpts from my journal. This is a picture of Unknown Pond. So day number 2, July 9th, close to 12 miles that day. I hiked from Mount Davis to the Edmonds Path near the Abenaki Brook. So I find that the DJ in my head is determined to spin an eclectic memory playlist as I hike along, as much as I just want peace and quiet. A snippet of a Mozart sonata that I played last year loops for a while, and then suddenly it's the Norwegian national anthem. Finally, I decided to take charge after Haydn, Elgar, and the Bee Gees all had a go. And I started repeating Quiet the Mind for a while, trying to understand when you meditate, how you quiet your mind. I tried a few things and the music did stop. I will continue in my efforts to experience a meditative hike tomorrow and try to learn how to keep the mental racket at bay. Day 6, July 13th, Unknown Pond to Devil's Rest Shelter. What I am absolutely loving about this trip is the solitude and the chance to have total peace, plenty of quiet, and the time away from regular life that I feel so compelled to find. All of this is here in generous nuggets along the trail. What I am not so cracked up about, let's get real, it's not all perfect, is sweating a lot, my slightly squeaky backpack, and the crazy DJ who continues to pop weird tunes into my head from time to time. But last night, and I guess I'm going to go back to Unknown Pond because this is such a gorgeous spot. Last night, as I sat by Unknown Pond, I realized that the DJ had called it an evening, and the only sounds in my head were the bullfrogs doing call and response around the pond, and the whirring of dragonfly wings, evening bird songs, and sometimes just the gentle breeze tickling the leaves around me. So camping along the trail is a combination of random campsites in the woods. This is my first night's campsite off somewhere in the woods off the Davis Path. There had been mention that there was an actual campsite, which I never found. And at a certain point, I just pulled in and found a nice spot, and it was very lovely. The Cohos Trail Association has built some incredible shelters, and there are 5 of them. They're all free, and they're available on a first-come, first-served basis. I never shared one with anyone, even on a Saturday night in July. This is the Devil's Rest Shelter, and I was the second visitor. This was their newest shelter that they had built earlier that summer, and it's absolutely exquisite. Here's one of their earlier shelters. I think this is Bald Head Shelter, and I'm really glad I didn't have to share this one because it's really tiny. As you get further north, you get into campgrounds. I had a great time at Rudy's campground near Clarksville Pond, and I'll just read. The people up there, I provided the entertainment when I showed up. I'll read you a little bit more from my journal. Day 10, July 17th. Rudy's campground is northern New Hampshire eclectic. A little bit of everything here, and it all seems to work. One of the original log cabins stands at the entrance, moldering into the ground, but no one seems to mind. A brand new bathhouse with a fantastic free shower and coin laundry. So I learned of these things from my welcoming committee, Bill and Mary, my neighbors across the way. The campground owners were out, but Bill and Mary, who spend the entire summer there in their campers, they had me set up in no time under the common canopy, and I became the center of attention. I got a hammer to pound in my tent stakes. I got my phone charged, and they showed me the laundry and the shower. And Mary was up the next morning at 6 o'clock with a delicious cup of coffee with real milk to wish me well along the trail. She was one of the gems of the trail. I will never forget Mary. So I continued north, and I was heading towards Canada, feeling like I was getting further north. This is a picture of a beautiful spot called Mauch Bowl. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. The Godwa Notch Trail starts as a road, and then it joins a snowmobile trail, and then it transitions to an overgrown road open to the solitary few Cohos trail hikers who come through, and of course moose, a lot of moose sightings. And at a crest of a long uphill push. The trail opened up into a bowl ringed by hills, and that was called Muse Bowl. The trees around me had changed to the northern forest combo, and fir trees were giving the air their signature aroma with graceful tamaracks waving in the breeze, with bright new growth and lichen and moss underfoot. The whole feel of the place really gave me a sense that I was heading northward. And I ended up in Cathedral Meadow. And it was just such a gorgeous spot. Aside from my feet being a little bit wet, it was very entertaining to make my way along the trail. I passed this Cathedral Meadow, followed shortly after that by Bulldozer Flats. There was a sign on the tree. Lots of different images as I went north. But I think one of my favorite parts of the trail was not a trail at all, but a road up McAllister Hill. And there were cows, there was a working farm, and vistas stretching to the horizon in the mist. And at the top of McAllister Hill, which was quite a hike, there's a place that in the guidebook it says it's an abandoned farm, but the place was neat as a pin. So someone is going up and keeping the lawns mowed. And I wished I could have walked across the keep out cable and sat on the porch. The view would probably be spectacular. And this is the view from a nearby snowmobile snack shack, which is kind of in the same area. And it's kind of hazy, but it was looking up towards Canada. And so I started getting pretty excited about that. So on one of my days, I followed really fresh moose tracks for more than 5 miles. I didn't see anybody, but I saw this moose track going ahead of me. So we never met, but it was really kind of cool to share the trail with my friend, the moose. And another morning, I found a beautiful bear track. So seems like that bear had passed by shortly before. So those were the more signs of animals along like that than there were of people hiking up there, until I got to within 2 days of the border. And then we had rented a cabin on one of the Connecticut lakes. And this is my college friend, Jocelyn, who's from Quebec. And she agreed to hike with me for the last 2 days, which we decided would be really fitting because we could cross the border as, our joint border, which sadly I can't go up there right now and see her, but I hope to. That'll be one of the first things I do when they open the border. So I explained to Jocelyn, who's done a good bit of hiking herself, that this trail is pretty fickle and that sometimes you can't find it. And she really I don't think she really believed me. She kind of nodded, but I could tell she was skeptical. But our first day together didn't disappoint at all. The Cohos Trail served up the usual combo of easy hiking on well-blazed routes and then misguided wanderings looking for the next marker. We ended up in some logged over areas where the trail had been temporarily disrupted, I guess I would say. And we spent a lot of time just trying to figure out where it is we should be going. But every once in a while, you see a really nice sign. They've got some beauties, and I wish they put more of them up, but it was very encouraging to see that sign. So at one point on our second day on the trail, after slogging through the woods and weeds and getting almost totally lost again, because we lost the trail. We looked up and saw this sign. You can't really see it. It says 500 yards ahead, the border, proceed slowly. So this was quite exciting. And we appeared out of the woods on the northern side of the US border station. So the trail dumped us into no man's land. And there was a sign on the fence that told us to push an intercom button. And we talked to the border agent and told them what we were doing. And they gave us permission to hike up the small trail, sort of rocky path that straddles the border up to the 4th Connecticut Lake. And there's a boundary marker. And you can just walk 1 foot in each country, which I just thought was the coolest thing. And I wasn't really sure what we were getting into with this Fourth Connecticut Lake, but it's really, really small. I wouldn't even call it a lake. And I was very excited to be there. Been thinking about it for so long. So it's the headwaters of this huge river, and there are places where you cross the Connecticut River along the way, and it's just a little stream. So I got there, and it was a great hike. I guess what I gained from this trek was that sometimes it's important to leave responsibilities behind and all your obligations and just step out of your life and go do something and just experience some moments like this there's nothing you have to worry about. Just enjoy lying amongst the daisies. I really felt this conviction that I had to do this. And I think that sometimes you need to follow that. That's a real lesson that I learned, that it's important if you have a burning desire to do something, if there's any way you can do it, it's important to do that. The time to be totally alone and to understand how that feels when it stretches over days and there's nobody to interact with. And I guess I never saw it as a midlife crisis, just as a challenge, something to do and needing to just step away. And it definitely served that purpose. 2 weeks was about enough time. And then going back for another 4 days this summer was quite a treat. And this is looking back from north of the White Mountains, looking across, I can't even remember what lake this was, but. So every woods related experience I ever had, I used, and all the knowledge of being out in the past was coupled with careful and thorough preparations and talking to people and just having some confidence to go do that, even when I couldn't find the trail, just stopping and reevaluating and figuring it out because I didn't really have a choice. I would say that Ed Parsons, who's a friend, and he wrote an article when I came back, he said it was a life affirming experience. And I said, that's exactly right. It just brings reality into sharper focus when the usual distractions and duties are just stripped away. And I think everyone probably has a life affirming experience waiting in the wings. And you just need to know what it is and grab it. And to do it before you can't do it. That's the other thing I was thinking, while you're still able. But even though I went on this trip alone, it was definitely not a journey that you completely do alone. I have to thank my family that really trusted that I could do this, and they trusted my abilities and let me go without having so many doubts. Trail angels who provided a lot of support, moral and otherwise, along the way. All those Cohos Trail people that have worked so hard to make this trail come together. And I actually, the September of 2018, I went and joined a trail work day and met a lot of them. And that was wonderful because they spend an awful lot of time. I also appreciate all my hiking mentors and my friends. And going way back to my childhood, the people that raised me to be confident in myself and to have humility and clear judgment. And I think especially my father and my grandfather, they never told me I couldn't do something because I was a girl. They just assumed I could do it. And my friend Ben, who I've known since 1968, and we still see each other every summer and we go wandering in the woods. So this discussion reflection was called Sublime Solos, and I looked up the definition of sublime, And one definition is of such excellence, grandeur, or beauty as to inspire great admiration or awe. So I have all of those things for Northern New Hampshire and for this trail. And stop the sharing, or keep that on there, or stop the sharing. I can't hear you.
You can stop it so we can all see you and ask questions. I'll
Okay.
to. Thanks. Are we all clapping? Wow. Awesome. I'm a little choked up. I don't know about anybody else. If anyone has questions, you can unmute yourself or you can type them into the box, but feel free to unmute yourselves.
I hate a silence when, you know, when huge accolades are called for, and you might think the silence is an absence of feeling. Amy, that was fabulous. Every single word and image. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to say, I happen to know that Amy Berrier made a book of this, which is also fabulous. But I think there's only one copy, so it's not like you can just go borrow it at the library.
But if anybody really wanted to borrow it, I took my whole journal and a lot of the pictures and put them into a book. And it's the chance to go do this. I will never forget having that chance. I appreciate everybody who helped me do it. I'm glad the trail's there. And I think it's kind of amazing that even in 2020, when everybody was packing the White Mountains and overusing all the trails, that still Northern New Hampshire is just a quiet, wild place. And it's a very different place from down here. When that picture of me on the porch, that's at the Jefferson Country Store, and I stopped there and waited for Thad to pick me up to take me around. And I was having some pizza, and these two fellows came up in a pickup truck, and they, probably in their 70s, and they'd probably been friends since grade school. And they looked at me and they looked at the big pack, and they were obviously curious. And they said, "Well, where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, I'm from Tamworth." And they looked at each other. And I said, "Down south of Conway." And they said, "Oh yeah, no, we never go down there. That's way too close to Massachusetts." And we don't go south of the Notch. And I realized that, if you live up there, probably everything down here is way too busy and you like it pretty quiet up there. We had a great chat, but they were totally puzzled why I would want to troop around the woods carrying that huge pack.
Amy, Sky asks whether a compass was helpful when you lost the trail.
Not really. I would say just backtracking to the last place of known, where I last saw Blaze, and looking around and looking at the map. And I really didn't use the compass. I think what happens sometimes, and I noticed this in the early part of the trail in the Dry River Wilderness, was I followed other people who had also gotten lost. And so there was a trodden path to the point where everybody realized that they weren't on the trail. And so everybody followed that path. So then I put some bushes, some brush in the way, but sometimes you just had to stop and think about it for a while and look around, and eventually you saw something. Or I would be hiking and not paying attention and miss a turn. I did that once. But yeah, I always found my way.
Another question about bugs. How were the bugs?
It was amazing, but I put on bug spray only twice. Once was just coming in behind the Mount Washington Hotel, hiking in on some of the cross-country ski trails along the river. And there was one other time, but bugs were really not a problem either 2 years ago or last year. And I do always set up my tent, just the screen part, in the shelter, because I don't like to have any bugs at night. So I don't set up the fly, I just set up the screen part and hop in there. So it's a little screen house.
Other question about how much your pack weighed.
I'd say between 35 and 38 pounds, but it depended on the resupply of food. I would carry about enough food for 5 days. So at the beginning it was pretty heavy, and then it gradually lightened up. And it also, you know, water was always a huge project. It was a very dry year and water was hard to come by. So when I found it, I loaded up my Camelback and my extra bottles and everything, and that added quite a lot of weight. But there were one time some people on the top of a beautiful little mountain called Mount Martha, they were day hiking, and they gave me their extra water because I was completely out, and they knew the trail ahead, and they said, you're not going to find water for 3 more miles. So water becomes this amazing resource that you take for granted when you turn on the tap, and when you're out in the woods, it becomes a major preoccupation. It takes up a lot of time to get it, but you know, you're really stripped down to the basics, and I love that. I wore the same shirt every day. I did wash it, and then it would dry, and then I put it back on. I'm just such a happy camper when it comes to wearing the same set of clothes every day. I love it.
So Amy, you said that you had 5 days worth of food at a time. Where did you restock, or did you have stashes put out ahead of time, or?
So one resupply was when Thad brought the food to me. There was a plan for restocking, which we changed a little bit. So he brought my resupply once, and then Jesse Dubuque and Morgan met me one time, and they brought a resupply. And I think those were the only two, because then I ended up at this cabin that we rented, and we were just day hiking for those last 2 days. So there was food. But yeah, I had made some freeze-dried dinners, and then instant oatmeal for breakfast, and just gorp and beef jerky. I took Robert's Family Farm beef jerky with me, which was delicious. But I can wear the same shirt every day, and I can eat the same food every day. So not everybody cares for that, but it works for me. So it kept it very simple. And I would make a few changes in the food. I found some great recipes online, and the woman really liked to put nuts in everything. I would leave out the nuts. Too filling, and they added extra weight. I didn't think I needed them, but yeah, so I ate plenty. I thought I would lose a bunch of weight. I think I lost 2 pounds, which was a little bit disappointing.
So Amy, this is Maureen. What is the deal about cohos, C-O-O-S, versus cohos, C-O-H-O-S? I thought this was called the C-O-O-S Trail, but obviously not.
So my understanding is that Cohos is an older spelling of the same name. And so this fellow Kim Nielsen was he thought of this trail over 20 years ago, and I think he came up with that name. And whether it is a Native American name, an old spelling, or just an older New Hampshire spelling. So yeah, they took the H out at some point for Cohos County, and this is the Cohos Trail. Maybe Ed Parsons knows something more than that, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not sure. Let's Google it.
Yeah.
There's a county on the coast of Southern Oregon called Cohos, C-O-O-S, but we all say Cohos. We don't say Cohos.
Anyway, most people call it, when they get into the lingo, they call it the CT. And you're either hiking Nobo or Sobo. So there's all this stuff. And I have so constantly entertained by the posts on the Facebook group, because people will come along and ask about hiking, and they're curious about it, and people share, and that's how I learned and asked a few questions. And some things aren't in the guidebook, and some, yeah, you can learn them from other people, and it feels like a very small community, relatively speaking. And I think it's a great place to go and discover. And there are excellent day hikes. I peeked at the website recently, and somebody has been doing some updating, because there are descriptions of day hikes or section hikes on the website, and it tells you start here, go to there. It tells you the level of difficulty, easy, moderate, tough, or strenuous. And it gives a lot of tips. That part of the website was not there when I started planning my trip, so they're getting better and better. And they put out different editions of the map. Yeah, when I hiked, they had put one of the shelters incorrectly on the map, which I found pretty annoying, because it wasn't where it was supposed to be. It was a little farther along the trail. So it's a group of volunteers. Got to hand it to them.
Amy, did fear ever creep in?
So for the most part, no. But to be totally honest, I had one time when I felt this little flutter of fear. And so what happened was, I was in, I think, the shelter that you saw, the Devil's Rest shelter. It's off of a snowmobile trail that's gated in the summer, so you're not supposed to be driving anything on that trail. And I heard a motor of like an ATV or a motorbike in the distance, and I heard the motor coming closer, and I thought, what are those people doing on this trail where they're not supposed to be? And then it just kept on going and disappeared. But I have to say that was the time. I wasn't afraid when I saw the bear print in the mud. I wasn't afraid when I got lost, but I was concerned when I heard that motor, just being by myself. I was trying to think, what would I do if they decided to come down and check out what's going on in the shelter? It didn't even come to pass, but that was my thought.
Thank you.
Did you bring anything to protect yourself?
No. I was talking at voting, the voting that happened after I had done this, and I brought the book and was sharing it, and Chief Dan Poirier was there, and he took a look at the book, and he asked me if I brought a gun. We had a very interesting discussion about having a gun. I would never even consider bringing one. Some people might, but it just like, what would I do with a gun? There are so few people in that area. Maybe your biggest issue would be an encounter with wildlife, but the wildlife is pretty well spread out, and nobody ever got into my food. I tried to hang my food in a tree, but the trees were so small that was kind of useless. But I figured, since nobody had been through in quite some time, it would take a while for the bears to find me, and by that time I'd be gone. So, but no, I didn't bring anything for protection.
Very interesting. Thank you. Great to hear and inspiring.
I'm happy to share. It's a lot of fun. It's fun to
Thanks
go
so
back
very
and
much.
revisit it.
Anyone else? Beth, you had kind of raised your hand before. You're on mute yet, but if you want to unmute yourself.
Okay. Amy, this is wonderful. Very, very beautiful to share, and the photos were great that you took. Did you get the sense that this is a path, an old path with much history, or is it just an old logging trail, or what it looks like it was designed to go from somewhere to somewhere. So what's your sense of that?
So this guy, I actually cleared trail with Kim Nielsen, the guy that started it, and we had a nice discussion while we were moving brush. And I asked him about that, and he at one point was looking at existing maps. This was over 20 years ago. And he was looking at the trails that already existed. And he got the idea, wouldn't it be cool to hike pretty much the entirety of Cohos County? And there were definitely trails in the White Mountains. There were snowmobile trails. There were other like rail trails and different things, but they didn't completely connect. So what his vision was that this group would build the trails that would connect. So there is no real single trail. And they've had to go on to roadways. I mean, I was hiking on Route 302 for a couple miles by Bretton Woods. They just don't have any way around that. So it's a trail in name, in that it helps you navigate from one point to another, and parts of it have existed for a very long time, and parts of it are being moved next year. You know, they're relocating some parts next year. And the part where I traveled along and behind the moose for 5 miles is this gorgeous trail, which has that last picture with the arch, called the Trio Trail, which is north of the Percy Peaks, north of Stark. And they built that entire trail. And it's just an amazing amount of work to build a brand new trail. But they were determined to get hikers off of the roads and the ATV tracks. That's their mission. So, you know, some trails are old and some trails are brand new, and everything in between. It's really just a neat concept.
Well, thanks so much, Amy.
Thanks for asking me.